Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Janani Sharadam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayosritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Namaste Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukhasvarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. We're extremely delighted that Swami Sarvasthananda from England is joining us today, and he will speak on yoga in daily life, ethical and moral principles, Yama Niyama, as the basis of yoga. All of us know that Patanjali has 8-limbed yoga, Ashtanga yoga. Unfortunately, in the present day, there is a tendency that it reduces to Shashtanga yoga. We begin with asana. Everybody begins with asana, thinking that asana is yoga. Asana is one part of yoga called Hatha Yoga. And Yama Niyama are the basic fundamental morals, principles, as the bedrock on which the entire system of yoga stands. And Yama Niyama are rarely emphasized when we speak of yoga. We start with asana and go to dhyana, and rarely samadhi is spoken of. People think asana and dhyana and pranayama are the main components of yoga, but no. Unless you have the moral basis, the ethical basis, spirituality is not possible. All the great spiritual masters, Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, have repeatedly emphasized purity of purpose, brahmacharya, self-control, truthfulness, unselfishness as very, very important basis of yoga. Today we'll have a talk by Swami Sarvasthananda. He is the minister in charge of the Ramakrishna Vedanta Center in the United Kingdom, and he's a fairly senior monk of our Ramakrishna order, and I've been serving there for a very long time. And we are happy that he obliged us by agreeing to give this talk on yoga in daily life, ethical and moral principles, Yama and Niyama as the basis of yoga. Swami Sarvasthananda, the floor is now yours.
Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Revered Swami Atma Priyananji Maharaj, it's a great pleasure to participate in this wonderful seminar on yoga on the eve of the International Yoga Day. And RKM Very, in collaboration with IUCYS, is organizing this seminar on fascinating facets of the multifaceted yoga. It's a very interesting topic because yoga, as Maharaj rightly said, people do not understand or give equal importance to all the 8 Ashtanga, the 8-limbed yoga as it is popularly known, Ashtanga yoga of Patanjali. So there are fascinating facets, a lot of facets which we perhaps overlook in our, everybody wants to meditate, or at a much grosser level, it is asana which is very popular, asana and pranayama, the physical yoga. But people forget, as Maharaj rightly said, it is the yama and niyama which forms the foundation of this entire Ashtanga yoga. Only when that is strong, the asanas, pranayama, pratyahara, dhyana, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. There are 8 steps, which is the goal of yoga. So, this is a very interesting topic, especially the ethical and moral principles, yama and niyama, as the basis of yoga. So, we all know, according to the yoga philosophy, which accepts 2 realities, Purusha and Prakriti, that it is only through ignorance that the soul has been joined with nature or Prakriti. The entire nature, the physical universe, the mental universe, and everything that we see around us is Prakriti. The gunas of Prakriti in various permutations and combinations give rise to this created world. And the goal, according to yoga philosophy, is to get rid of this control of nature over us. Swamiji very nicely put it, that the goal of all religions, whether they accept Patanjali's yoga or not, directly or indirectly, they are all aimed at one goal, that is how to get rid of nature's control over us, Prakriti's control over the Purusha. So Purusha wants to regain its true nature. I mean, that is the goal of every religion and especially yoga. So we all know the famous quote of Swamiji. He says, each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity within. The divinity within is nothing but our real nature, which is Purusha. And how do we do it? By controlling nature, both external and internal. So he says, do this either by work or worship or psychic control, which is the goal of Patanjali's yoga or Raj Yoga as he called it, or philosophy, by one or more or all of this and be free. That is the whole of religion. All other things, they are secondary, whether it's dogmas, rituals, books, temples, forms, and all other details. So the yogi, according to the system of yoga, Patanjali's yoga, tries to achieve this goal through psychic control. So unless we are free, unless we are able to free ourselves from the clutches of nature, we are slaves. And nature will dictate, our gunas will dictate, Prakriti will dictate. And we have to do her bidding, Prakriti's bidding. So the yogi claims that he who controls the mind can control the matter also. So mind being more subtle than matter, mind is of course finer matter, but it is internal nature. If you control, you can control. This is one of the basic ideas behind Patanjali's yoga, that the internal nature or the mind, the sukshma sharira, is much higher than the external, and obviously it is more difficult to grapple with. So it's easy to control external nature, but it is very difficult to control the mind. We have so many sentences in the Vedas, the Upanishads, even Bhagavad Gita. Sri Krishna says the mind is very difficult to control. But for that reason, it doesn't mean that we should not attempt. But there is a system. Patanjali is very systematic. He says you don't have to just control your mind at the first step. You start from the basic steps. That is, try to practice yama and niyama. We'll see what it is and why it is the basis of all the yogas. So, no doubt, one who has conquered internal nature, that is the mind, controls the whole universe. The whole universe, the external universe, becomes his servant. That is the content of the Vibhuti Pada. If you see, we will come to the outline of yoga philosophy as Patanjali has explained it. So Patanjali's yoga propounds these methods of gaining this control over Prakriti or nature. Forces higher than that which we know in physical nature, which science has more or less controlled, they will have to be subdued. The internal forces have to be subdued. And the body is nothing but the external crust of the mind. So we are primarily the mind, but we have an external crust, which is the body. So giving so much importance to the pranayama and asana, it is just taking care of the crust. We have not yet reached the core. But before we reach the core, there are certain fundamental things we have to follow. These are the yama and niyama. So, internal fine forces, the prana controls these forces, the fine forces of the mind, the nervous forces, they are all vital forces which control the external body. These forces, which we call the mind, take up the gross matter from outside. That is how Swamiji explains. It takes up the gross, it manufactures, as it were, the body. And the finer forces control it. So if we control the finer forces, we can control the external. So these forces are the internal forces. If we control, as I said, it's easy to control the external, but they are the gross, they are the fine forces are the physical forces are the gross manifestations of the fine forces within us, the nervous energy and all those things. So we have to remember this. Anything we do in the external world impacts the finer forces, just as the thoughts and finer forces impact the external forces, the external body, the crust. So that is why we have so many diseases known as psychosomatic diseases. Most diseases have their origin in the mind. Partially, it is the mind which is responsible for all the problems of the external world, the Annamaya Kosha. So, what is morality or ethics? Why do we have to practice yama and niyama? Swamiji gives a wonderful explanation. I've never seen a better explanation of morality, a very scientific and rational approach. He says, what is morality? Making the subject, that is Purusha, strong by attuning it to the absolute, to the Purusha or the Atman, so that the finite nature ceases to have control over us. That is the fundamental idea behind morality and the ethical theories. And then he says there are two components of every action. One is the subject and the object. So the one aim of life, of all religions, of all yoga, for every spiritual endeavor is to make the subject the master of the object. So Purusha, we have to identify ourselves with the Purusha, not with Prakriti. So my struggle will be to make myself so strong that I can conquer the external as well as internal environment, and the external events will not impact me. So change, according to Swamiji, morality, the whole basis of morality or ethics or yama and niyama is always subjective. The conquest of evil, the so-called evil in the world that we see around us, can come only by the change in the subject alone. But how to achieve this? Now, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, as you all know, it begins with Samadhi Pada. It should have started with Sadhana Pada, but Samadhi Pada is given before the Sadhana Pada, the actual process, because Patanjali would like us to know what is the goal that we are attempting to reach. The goal of yoga, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, is what we do. But how to attain to that Chitta Vritti Nirodha and reach Kaivalya or Samadhi? So apart from the Kaivalya Pada, which has 34 sutras, which is the last part, and the Vibhuti Pada, which is 55 sutras, which is the third part, in between there is this Sadhana Pada. It is in the Sadhana Pada, the Yama and Niyama have been very clearly described, not only described how to, but what is the result if we practice these Yamas and Niyamas. Briefly, to put it briefly, Yama and Niyama. Yama means external control. Niyama can be defined as internal control. We'll see what it is. So, yoga, as I said, the first, second and third and fourth sutras give the whole essence or the goal of yoga. That is, yoga is the yoga means Chitta Vritti Nirodha, suppression of the modifications of the mind, which is known as Chitta. We all of us know that. Then, in that state, once you control the Chitta Vritti, what happens? Tada Drashtuhu, the seer, the self, Swarupe Avasthanam. He abides in his own essential nature, Swarupa, Swarupe, Ast, Tada Drashtu Swarupe Avasthanam. So this gives the gist of what yoga is all about. And what about the rest of the time when we are not in a state of yoga, when we have not reached that goal of chitta vritti nirodha, or that kaivalya or samadhi? What happens when, in the normal case, in the normal state of mind, in the normal the way we live in the world, on other occasions, all other occasions, itaratra, vritti sarupyam itaratra, means there is identity between the seer and the modifications of the mind. This is the whole secret of yoga. As you think, so you become. That's the famous quote of Buddha. Buddha said, as your mental modification, so is your identity. We identify with the changing modifications of the mind, and that gives us a temporary or a false or a transient identity, and we suffer because of that. So the whole goal of yoga is to just somehow, through all these Ashtanga, 8 steps, starting with Yama and Niyama, to control to reach or to identify Sarupya, to Swarupe Avasthanam, to abide in our eternal self, the Purusha. It recognizes itself as the Purusha, not as the plaything of Prakriti. The modifications of Guna make us jump about in nature. So that is because the vrittis make us dance to its tune. The modifications of the mind make us feel vritti sarupya, that identity is dangerous, that we have to disconnect ourselves. So now the goal, as I said, the 34th sutra, the beautiful sutra of the Kaivalya Pada, 34th sutra, that is the last yoga sutra, and he concludes with iti. Iti means this is the whole of yoga. Purushartha shunyanam gunanam pratiprasava. Guna means gunas of prakriti. Complete liberation, or the highest samadhi, or the highest realization, complete liberation, or the power of consciousness is established. Swaswarupe avasthanam, which I said, we become one with the Purusha. When it is pratishtha in Swaswarupa, when the gunas of Prakriti, guna nam, the qualities of Prakriti are known as gunas, sattva, rajas and tamas. So pratiprasavaha, Prakriti, they have no further purpose to fulfill. Artha shunyanam, for Purusha. Iti means this indicates the end of the scripture. So pratiprasava means they go back to their original source. The complete liberation or kaivalya takes place. That is the ultimate goal of yoga. Now, how do we, what place do we assign to Yama and Niyama in this? So the 26th sutra of the same chapter of this Sadhana Pada says, that is Kaivalya Pada, the last sutra I said, but 26th sutra gives a beautiful description how to go about doing this, how to follow this Yama and Niyama. So you have to destroy the ignorance by unbroken practice of discrimination. So Viveka Khatir Aviplava Hanopaya. Hana means liberation. Upaya means the means for liberation is only through discriminative knowledge. Knowledge means khyati. The discriminative knowledge which is completely clear and devoid of all confusion. Vrittis confuse our mind. Vrittis give us a false sense of identity. So that is known as this confusion or disorder caused by the changing states of the mind is known as aviplava. This which is complete aviplava. Viplava means confusion. Aviplava means that state which is completely devoid of confusion. So Swamiji in his Raj Yoga beautifully explains this, saying is the real goal of practice of yoga is the discrimination between the real and the unreal. Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka. Vedanta also says we have to do that, knowing that the Purusha is not nature. That separation. Purusha is not nature. It has nothing to do with nature. Pure consciousness has nothing to do with nature. That it is neither mind nor matter. And that because it is not nature, it cannot change. It has to be changeless, eternal. It is only nature, the Prakriti, that changes, combining, recombining, dissolving, continually it happens. So through constant practice, we have to discriminate, and then only the avidya or ignorance will vanish. And then what remains? The Purusha will begin to shine in its real nature, Swaswarupe Avasthanam, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. This is how Swamiji explains. Now, 29th Sutra of this Sadhana Pada says, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhaya, Ashtau Angani, the 8 limbs of yoga. All of us know it begins with Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, and the 8th one is Samadhi. These are the 8 limbs. Now, Raj Yoga, Swamiji says, there are many things. We will go into these a little in detail. The 30th Sutra, the very next Sutra, says, what are the Yamas? What are the Yamas? Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha. That is, Ahimsa means non-killing or harmlessness. That is a better word. Satya, veracity or truthfulness. Asteya, abstention from stealing or not taking that which does not belong to you, rightfully belong to you. Even keeping that is stealing. Abstention from stealing. Asteya. Brahmacharya, that is continence. Literally, it means dwelling in Brahman, Brahmacharya. But in common practice, it is the practice of continence. And then finally, aparigraha, that is non-possession, abstinence from covetousness, or you can say we have a tendency to accumulate things. So that abstinence is aparigraha. So these are the 5 yamas or restraints. But mind you, the difference between yama and niyama are subtle. Yama are external controls, by controlling the mind, by controlling the externals. So ahimsa is that we should live in such a way. This ultimately will see that it leads to the higher states which we need to practice. The pratyahara, dharana, these are not so easy to practice. Every time we neglect one of these 5 yamas and 5 niyamas, you will find that it becomes extremely difficult to control the modifications of the minds or vrittis, because these vrittis are caused by these lack of practice or self-control by not practicing these yamas and niyamas. So we have to live so that no harm or pain, it's not just not killing others, no harm or pain should be caused by us in thoughts, words, or even deeds. Deeds, of course, but even in thoughts and words. We don't know the power of the spoken word, how we casually use words, and it can lead to so much of trouble for ourselves and for others. So even words, even thoughts, silent thoughts, which we harbor for other people, hatred and jealousy and all those things. So in a positive sense, if you see, this means that we must cultivate love for all. In a negative sense, of course, we should avoid himsa, but that doesn't mean we have to be dry people. We have to see the Atman within everybody, the divine within everybody, as Swamiji said. And in a positive way, ahimsa means cultivating love for all creatures. Everything that is created, we should create love for all. Then in Satya, of course, Thakur's main, Sri Ramakrishna used to say, spirituality consists in this Kali Yuga, Satya is the tapasya. What do you mean by Satya? Making the heart and the lips, thought and deeds the same. The words that we utter should come from the bottom of the heart, and we should be careful not to hurt others. Satya doesn't mean that one has to be, as Holy Mother said, one should never speak a truth which harms others. So we need not hurt others by saying what is cruel, even if it happens to be true. On such occasions, I think it is better that we just keep silent rather than tell any untruth. But making the heart and lips the same is the essence of Satya, as Sri Ramakrishna explains. Asteya is not enough, it is not enough to abstain from theft. We should not harbor any feeling that we covet this thing or that thing, either towards persons or objects. It's not necessarily objects alone. Even towards persons, if we have some kind of feeling that this is mine, he or she is mine, that is also a kind of asteya. We try to grab certain things which really do not belong to us. We should remember always, it's a good idea to remember that nothing in this world of Prakriti, in the world of gunas, really belongs to us. At the best, we are just borrowers. We just keep it. We are trustees. As Swamiji used to say, we are trustees for all the wealth that has been created by us. So it is our duty to borrow no more from the world. That is why simple living helps a lot. Then there is enough in this world for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed, as Mahatma Gandhi said. So to make full and proper use of the things that we need, we should stick to that. That in spirit is practicing asteya. It's not just stealing something. So taking more than what we need and wasting it is some kind of stealing from the rest of mankind. And we do it. We not only use it, but sometimes destroy certain things or waste certain things. So whatever we don't need, even if we don't need, we take it and then waste it, is also a form of asteya. Of course, brahmacharya, Swamiji says continence in chastity, word, thought and deed is what is meant by brahmacharya. So this one has to, even Patanjali describes it that way, the commentators of Patanjali. To be freed from the idea of sex is to achieve purity of heart. So sex and attachment are intimately connected, and attachment of any sort, good or bad, is an obstacle to spiritual knowledge. Whatever makes us combine with the gunas of Prakriti, the idea is to be free, the idea is to be detached. Yoga is actually defined more as Viyoga, to separate the Prakriti from Purusha. So it's a kind of detachment that we are practicing, and brahmacharya is absolutely essential. Now, aparigraha can be best defined as abstention of greed and also abstention from receiving gifts. So Swamiji here says something very nice. He says the mind of the man, it's not just accepting gifts is evil. The mind of the man who receives these gifts, Swamiji says, is acted upon by the mind of the giver. If he has certain selfish intentions, we partake it is definitely our mind is impacted by the mind of the giver. So it's not so easy to accept a thing. It will always be conditional. So the receiver is likely to be degenerated. So, and more than that, Swamiji says it makes us slavish. It destroys the independence of mind and makes us slavish. So this may seem to be a very hard saying, that is very hard thing not to accept anything. But Patanjali is trying to describe these 6 strict disciplines for a dedicated yogi, one who has a higher goal in mind, not just the asanas and pranayama, some kind of yoga which will make us healthy, make us healthy and strong. That is not the goal of yoga. These disciplines, yama and niyama, are meant for those who really want to reach the conclusion of yoga, attain to the highest state which yoga promises to take us to. So more in everyday world, some gifts which are given out of love, they may be relatively harmless, but as long as they are as a token of genuine affection, we should not make it a obsession. We should not be paranoid about that I'll not touch, not accept a single gift. Sometimes if it is given with love and reverence without any expectation of return, it will not result in aparigraha. So that we have to remember. Now, these laws or the yama and niyama are not exclusive to Patanjali's yoga system. That's why in 31st Sutra, he beautifully says, Jati Desha Kala Samaya Anavachinnaha Sarvabhauma Mahavratam. These are the great vows. If you compare all the religions of the world, you will find that these yamas or niyamas, both, they are the universal vows you will find a part of every religion. They are unbroken, or anavichinna means unbroken by time, place, purpose, and caste rules. These are the great universal vows. So you'll find the Bible, in the Bible and all the scriptures of the world, they insist on this yama and niyama. For that reason, we should not think that it is unique to the system of Patanjali alone. So Patanjali's yoga, Ashtanga yoga, can form the basis of all religions. That's another reason why yama and niyama are essential. They may differ. Asanas may not be there in other religions. Pranayama also, they may not practice the way Patanjali tells us to practice. But there's not a single religion, according to Swamiji, where yama and niyama do not form the basis. So if one practices yama and niyama, then he is fit to practice other higher forms of spiritual practice, including Patanjali's Ashtanga yoga. So that is what we have to remember. Sarvabhaumaha means universal. That is what he said. Then we come to the niyamas. Now let us briefly see what these niyamas are. Shaucha Santosha Tapaha Swadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhanani Niyamaha. So what are these? These are the internal and external purification. That is Shaucha. It's not just the external cleanliness that is meant here, though Shaucha really means cleanliness, but it is both internal and external purification. Then Santosha, contentment. Holy Mother used to say in Bengali, there is no virtue higher than contentment. We don't realize in this universe of ours, in this world of ours, how discontentment makes people suffer. There is no santosha. One is not satisfied with whatever he gets. So that contentment also is important. Austerity or penance, that is tapas, tapaha. Study and recitation of sacred scriptures, swadhyaya, which includes the practice of japa, according to Swamiji, we'll see that, and devotion to the Supreme Lord. These are the 5 niyamas. This is sutra number 32. So Shaucha, there are 2 parts to it. The sages always say Shaucha is both external and internal. The purification of the body by water, earth, or other materials which we use is external purification, as bathing, etc. But the purification of mind, how can we practice that? It is by practicing virtues like truth. It is these virtues, the yamas which we discuss, satya, asteya, by practicing them, we practice inner purification. So both are necessary. It is not that one should be internally pure and externally one has to be dirty. So cleanliness is next to godliness, as they say. So we have to be very particular about external purity, but at the same time, the yamas which we discussed earlier, they have to be practiced so that there is some internal purity also. Brahmacharya is one of them. Asteya, parigraha, these are all meant for internal purity. So when both are there, internal as external, one will be a yogi. If a man thinks that he is the dwelling place of the Atman, he will naturally feel that his body and mind have to be kept clean. Otherwise, how can I ask the divine to take a seat in our heart? So, moreover, external cleanliness is important because of the psychological effect upon us. Some people, if they don't take a bath, they feel so uneasy. Though they may be clean, but still that idea, the psychological impact or effect is also very important. The internal organs of the body also must be cleansed. That is, we have to follow a mental diet. So say we practice all these yamas. So that mental food and good mental food, avoiding gossip, light entertainment, which can lead to anxieties, addictions, aversions, all types of things, the external things that we do, which result in some kind of, you may say, anxieties and aversions and addiction should be avoided. So one has to resort to cleanliness of the mind, that is internal cleanliness, by maintaining a constant alertness. You see, that is known as prajna aparadha. Prajna means the alertness or the awareness, the consciousness. If we just slip a little bit, then we have a tendency to gravitate down to the gross level. So by constant alertness, this virtue has to be practiced. That is, this shaucha has to be practiced. Now we come to santosha. Patanjali says contentment means acceptance of one's lot in life, whatever comes to us, untroubled by any kind of envy or restlessness. Because envy and jealousy gives rise to restlessness. That is harmful. Chitta, vrittis of the chitta rise, and that gives rise to restlessness. So religious preachers all over the world, they always say that one has to be content. But here it is not referred, I mean, it is material contentment. It's not spiritual contentment. So it does not mean one has to be indifferent. Otherwise, if you say that I am content and I'll not do any spiritual practices, no, it is not some indifference. Contentment should not be confused with indifference. As members of a community, service in a spirit of service of God in man, useful service, one can never be content. One has to do till the end of one's life. And we must take contentment in a positive way. It is a positive duty of all of us to help our less fortunate neighbors or underprivileged people. So the idea behind contentment is there should not be any motive of personal gain or advantage. That is what is meant by contentment. It is an entirely subjective feeling. That is why Holy Mother said, Santosher Muto ar gun hoina. Means there's no virtue higher than Santosha. So that is the importance. Contentment, lack of contentment causes so much of restlessness, anxiety, worries, like trying to live up with the Joneses, as they say. Our neighbors have certain things, we don't have it, we strive to get it. So that affects our chitta vrittis. The chitta vrittis are go into a restless mode. So to prevent that, one has to practice contentment. This is one important niyama. And the next is austerity or tapas. Now, this Sanskrit word tapas is been used by Patanjali in a primary sense. It means that which generates heat or energy. Tapas. So actually, if we try to understand it a little deeply, it actually means conserving energy and directing it towards the practice of yoga. We are expending so much of energy in our daily lives, and that leaves us very little time for yoga, the true yoga, towards the union with Purusha or the Atman. So we have to conserve energy. That is what tapas actually does. Self-discipline is not something which we have to do as like torturing your body and all this. Tapasya normally, if it is not done with the proper attitude, it can lead to vanity, that I am doing these things. Tapasya should not be practiced for the sake of practicing tapasya. This self-discipline is necessary to conserve energy. So we must exercise self-discipline so that we can control our physical appetites and passions, which drain away a lot of our energy. So austerity for austerity's sake, if we do, it degenerates into a perverse cult of self-torture. We find many of the, especially in some of the monastic orders, this self-torture becomes an obsession. And one should not forget that there is a great danger in that also. The end should not be forgotten. The end should be, the means are important. What you do, the motive is important. That is why very beautifully the Gita defines three kinds of austerities. Very clearly, the Gita gives a beautiful explanation of austerity or tapas, saying reverence for the Holy Spirits. To tell you in brief, the seers, the teachers, the rishis, the sages. That is one kind of tapas. Straightforwardness, harmlessness, physical cleanliness, and sexual purity. These are the austerities of the body, sharirik tapaha. To speak without causing pain to others, they're all yama and niyama. If you see, Gita has classified these yama and niyama, and that is nothing but practice of yama and niyama ultimately can be defined as practicing tapasya. Tapasya of the body, tapasya of the mind, and tapasya of the spirit, that is speech. Then tapasya of speech has been described. Practice of bodily tapasya we saw in Gita. The practice of uh, speaking in a way that does not cause pain to another, to be truthful, and to say always what is kind and beneficial, and to study the scriptures regularly, to recite the mantra also. Swamiji will say that is also part of tapasya. So this practice is called austerity or tapasya of the speech, tapaha, the tapa of the speech. Then there is a tapa of the mind at the physical level, at the spoken level, or the level of the speech. The practice of serenity, sympathy, meditation upon the Atman, withdrawal, pratyahara of the mind from the sense objects, and integrity of motive is called sankalpa, that we do. A good sankalpa is called austerity of the mind. So these are the three tapas. So we have to understand this niyama in the light of the teachings of the Gita. Now, regarding Swadhyaya, we come to the second last niyama before Ishwar Pranidhana. We come to Swadhyaya, where normally Swamiji defines it as repeating of the Vedas and the other mantras by which the sattva material in us is in the body and the mind is purified. That is the correct definition. Swadhyaya means not just any reading. There may be, we can read any number of books, any number of texts, but do they purify the sattva material? Sattva shuddhi, does it take place? If it takes place, then it is called study. So Swamiji says there are three types of repetition of mantra. One is verbal. He gives a lot of Swadhyaya according to Swamiji is mainly repetition of these mantras or the shastras or the sutras and other things which help us to think about the Purusha or the Atman or the highest reality, the pure consciousness. So he says there are verbal, semi-verbal, and mental. So he says the verbal repetition is the lowest and the inaudible or the mental repetition is the highest. The repetition which is loud is verbal. The next one where only the lips move but no sound is heard, and the inaudible repetition of mantra accompanied by the highest thinking of its meaning. That is why all the japa in our sadhana, in the upasana that we do, one is advised to do only mental repetition. Even the lips should not move because that is the highest form of swadhyaya. So these are Swamiji's words. He says, accompanied with the thinking of its meaning, the purpose of the mantra, where does it lead us to? The mantra leads us because the sound has come from Brahman himself. Shabda Brahma. Om has come from Brahman. It is the manifestation of Brahman. As it goes, the Shabda and Artha form this whole universe. So we have to follow the reverse process. The sadhana of mantra sadhana is nothing but following the reverse process from gross to subtle, subtle to the source of the mantra. So the mantra, according to Swamiji, is this swadhyaya, means nothing but practicing the mantra. Then we come to Ishwara Pranidhana. That means worshipping God and surrendering one's will to Him. Now, we have about 15 minutes. I'll just try to we will try to see what the practice of these virtues do to us. So we will just see. Yeah. Now we directly come to just 5 sutras we will discuss, because one has to realize the importance. Unlike the Vibhuti Pada, where the benefits of doing different sadhanas are explained. In this sadhana pada, what happens when we practice ahimsa? What happens when we practice asteya? There are specific reasons why these yama and niyama have to be practiced. So we'll just, in the next 10 minutes, we'll just discuss its importance, what it does to us, how does it help in our day-to-day life, in our sadhana. So, ahimsa pratisthayam, on the establishment of ahimsa, it has to be practiced for a long time, no doubt. What happens? So the phala of that, the 35th sutra says, ahimsa pratisthayam tat sannidau vaira tyagaha. That means on the establishment of pratisthayam, of ahimsa or non-injury, a yogi, in a yogi, what happens? There is a cessation, tyaga, which stoppage of hostility or hostile feelings, vaira bhava. By coming close to him, I mean, Swamiji explains it in a beautiful way that in the presence of somebody who is practiced ahimsa, it can be seen, many times it has happened in his own life. Tigers, he was walking all alone. There's a famous incident even in a place very 5 miles away from this place. A bull attacked Swamiji. Sturdy and all other disciples were there. A ferocious bull attacked them, and Swamiji just stood there. Of course, he joked. He said, I was just calculating how far the bull will throw me. But it is not as simple as that. Why did the bull stop and retreat? So the idea is, this sutra says very clearly, sutra number 35 says, if one is established in ahimsa, in his presence all enmity cease. There are many pictures, many wonderful stories where Buddha and all these great people have shown to be living amongst the wild beasts, and they just come and they just don't harm, because perhaps they get the vibrations of ahimsa, the wonderful power of ahimsa, that hostility, that mental agitation or hostility which accompanies himsa is totally stopped. So perhaps that induces a kind of lack of hostility, tyagaha, vaira tyagaha, in other animals as well. So it is so contagious that if one is established in non-killing, in his presence everybody becomes peaceful. That is one. So Swami Vivekananda says, if a man gets this ideal of non-injuring others, before him even animals, these are Swamiji's words, animals which are by their nature ferocious will become peaceful. The tiger and lamb will play together before that yogi. So that's the beautiful sculpture Swamiji wanted to be done. In fact, in some of our Ramakrishna mission, Ramakrishna temples, you will find this tiger and the lamb are drinking water from the same pond, or they're meeting each other. So he says, when you have come to that stage, when you have been established in ahimsa, you will understand that you have been firmly established in non-injuring ahimsa, when you can create such an aura of peace around you. So it is entirely subjective, as we mentioned earlier. These virtues are to be practiced. Though it is subjective, it impacts. By controlling inner nature, we control the external nature. Now, what happens when we practice satya? So this is sutra number 36, where it says, on the establishment or pratisthayam, satya pratisthayam, kriyaphala ashrayatvam, a state of ashrayatvam, kriyaphala, means by the establishment or of the satya or truthfulness in the yogi, when satya is established, or one is established in truth, a state of connection between his actions and the consequences, phala, is established. So what does it mean? That all that the yogi says, satya sankalpa, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, that whenever any thought came to his mind, it was true. So truth, whatever he utters, whatever he does, the consequences are intimately connected with the idea that is expressed. So there is a intimate connection. So all that the above mentioned yogi, Swamiji says, will come true. So he becomes a Satya Sankalpa, or he becomes a person whose words become true. Whatever he says, that is why we see in the rishis of the past, they used to bless, and people used to uh, uh, go to them for blessings, because they knew that if the words of blessings of this person who is established in Satya will never be untrue. Sri Ramakrishna's father, Shudiram, also was like that. So people used to respect him for that. So the yogi gets the power of attaining. Here literally it means attaining for himself the fruits of his work. But that is not the real reason. The truthfulness that the yogi, if he uses it for a, definitely they will use it for a positive uh, purpose. So Swamiji says in his Raj Yoga, I'll just quote that, कि whenever the power of truth is established with you, then even in dream, you will not tell an untruth. So Swamiji explains this sutra in this way. You will be true in thought, word, and deed. Sri Ramakrishna was an excellent example of this. So that's why he said in this Kali Yuga, it is so difficult to hold on to truth in thought, word, and deed. It is a kind of tapasya. It is a kind of niyama which we have to practice. Whatever you say will be truth. As a consequence of this, Patanjali says, if you hold on to truth continuously for such a long time, whatever you say will be truth. You may say to a man, be blessed, Swamiji says, and that man will be blessed. If a man is deceased and you say to him, be thou cured, and he will be cured immediately. So this is the power of this niyama. So in our day-to-day life, we want so many things. We want somebody, we want to help somebody, but we feel so we are so powerless. But if we develop this power, it can be used for the good. It's not that it should be used for curing people and all those things, as some of the prophets, of course, they did. Jesus did. There are much higher things. As Sri Ramakrishna, he could change the minds of people. He could bless them to overcome the limitations of the body and be free. He could free people by touch. So that is what happens when one is established in Satya. Then we come to the next one, 37th sutra of the Sadhana Pada, which also deals with another important niyama, that is Asteya Pratisthayam. Asteya Pratisthayam Sarva Ratno Pasthanam. So jewels here does not mean the jewels as we understand it. He says if somebody is established in non-stealing, the yogi, all the jewels stand near in order to serve him. It should be used in a figurative way. It's not that the jewels will come. For a yogi, there's no use. But good people, jewels means, as Akbar surrounded himself with this Navaratna. Jewel is used in our scriptures in a figurative way, that people of excellent qualities, things, all excellence will come to you. So they literally it means Sarva Ratna Upasthanam, means all Ratna, all the jewels come to him. So Swamiji says, the more, Swamiji gives a different example. He says the more you fly from nature, the more she follows you. But if you don't care for her at all, she becomes your slave. So this is the result of Asteya, that nature responds to whatever we need. Swamiji did not care for where the food will come from, and he found that everything came to him. So Swamiji used to say, manifest that divinity within, and everything else will be added unto you. Everything will be harmoniously arranged around you. That is what it really means here, this sutra number 34, that all the ratnas will come to you. Only that which you need, of course, the yogi doesn't need jewels. But if we just fly from nature, if we align ourselves to Purusha, then the nature becomes your slave and gives whatever you want. That is the import here of this verse. And then we come to Brahmacharya. On the establishment of Brahmacharya, that is Brahmacharya Pratisthayam Virya Labha. So Virya here means energy, vigor, stamina, strength. So there are so many aspects of this brahmacharya. Swamiji says the chaste brain has tremendous energy and gigantic willpower. That's why all the religious orders insisted on this brahmacharya, this virtue of brahmacharya. There is a very important niyama, especially there cannot be any spiritual strength without this brahmacharya. And these are Swamiji's words. He says, without chastity, there can be no spiritual strength. And it is continence alone that gives wonderful control over mankind. The spiritual leaders of men, Swamiji says, have been very continent men. And that is what gave them power. Therefore, the yogi must be continent. So that is another of the niyama as it is explained. So these are the, first we saw what these yamas and niyamas are. And now Patanjali in the same chapter explains to us by these different sutras, what is the consequence of this? Why do we have to practice this yama and niyama in our daily life? Before even we start asana and pranayama and try to control our mind and reach the goal of yoga, it is a far cry for people who have not established themselves in yama and niyama. This is an important point that we have to remember, because we are at the mercy of nature. Prakriti is always influencing us with so much effort. If we try to meditate, do dhyana, dharana without giving any importance to this yama and niyama, then the chances that we will be able to meditate, that itself is lessened, because we can't meditate when our mind is restless, whenever these things, self-control is missing from our life. So when we establish ourselves on the firm foundation of yama and niyama, you will find that the consequences of these are what Patanjali is explaining. Then we come to the last, aparigraha. What does it do? Sthairye, when we are firmly established in aparigraha. Janma kathana, janma, what is this? Kathanta. Sambodha means when the yogi firmly stands on, is established in aparigraha or non-possession, full knowledge of, now this is really interesting, the how and what state about the past, present and future, that arises in the yogi's mind. Now what does it mean? Swami Vivekananda in one place told Sister Nivedita that what is the function of a guru? A guru obviously is a yogi of the highest order. An ideal guru is the yogi, should be a yogi of the highest order. So if he is established in the virtue of aparigraha, which he has to, then you will find that he has the full knowledge of the past, present and future. When Nivedita asked what is the function of a guru, then Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda very clearly said, he who can tell you your past, present and future is your guru. Obviously, he told it in a very simple way, but how difficult it is. But that comes according to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, this last niyama, aparigraha sthairye, janma kathanta sambodha. That means the how, the why, and everything about the past, present and future of an individual can be seen. That is what Sri Ramakrishna did. He could see not only the past of somebody, all the samskaras, he could see what he has to do, and he could also guide him and anticipate what he will do in the future and guide a person accordingly. So that only a yogi does. So now we will come to the, but Swamiji gives a small explanation in his Raj Yoga. We'll just see. Aparigraha literally means not accepting gifts. So on a practical, from a practical point of view, Swamiji tries to explain it this way. He says, when a man does not receive presents or gifts, he does not become beholden to others. This is a very pragmatic way of understanding what aparigraha does at a much lower level. Of course, to see the past, present and future is a much higher result of aparigraha practiced over several years. I mean, if one has to be established in that. But even at a lower level, Swamiji says, with every gift, he is likely to receive the evils of the giver. If he does not receive, the mind is purified. If he does not receive any gifts, the first advantage is his mind is purified. And Swamiji says something wonderful. He says that he gets a power and he gets the memory of his past life. Now, seeing the past, present, and future is explained through this paragraph of Swamiji. He says, then alone yogi becomes perfectly fixed in his ideal. He says that he has been coming and going many times. So they get an idea of the innumerable lives they have led. So that gives a kind of vairagya, that have I to live this life again and again and again. He sees in his front of his eyes all the stages that he has passed through in this and the previous lives. So the memory of the past is what you get if you are very much particular about this aparigraha. So he becomes determined. The consequence of this aparigraha is that he becomes determined that I have suffered so much in the past that I don't want any future birth. That kind of vairagya, that kind of detachment to rebirth, that intense desire for moksha, mukti, that comes. And he becomes determined and says that this time I will be free. There is no more coming and going, and I shall refuse to be a slave of nature. So for a small thing, a small niyama like aparigraha can, if practiced sincerely in letter and spirit, it will take us to the highest freedom. That is the benefit of yama and niyama. And shaucha. From shaucha, what happens? He says from shaucha, there is a jugupsa, a disgust for one's own body. Now, it seems to be a very dangerous proposition. If we really hate our body, what do we gain? But the result why we that kind of jugupsa means it's a kind of dislike for our own body, the grossness that is associated with our existence. It's definitely not, especially when the body gets old. Everybody starts hating. He said, what a what a burden this body is, especially when we age, when we become older. So that jugupsa from cleanliness, if cleanliness is when we are established in shauchat, means by practicing shaucha, a disinterestedness comes. We become unconcerned, because the Swamiji says, the commentator also says, that asam sargaha means contact with other bodies also becomes distasteful. If he hates his own body, then naturally that is the reason why shaucha has to be practiced. So that is why sometimes it goes to the extreme. We go on cleaning our body. It's not just the physical cleanliness that is meant, but a kind of detachment towards anything that is gross. What do you mean by purity? What do you mean by cleanliness? Cleanliness means trying to be as much less gross in our approach to things, objects, and other things as possible. Thinking more of the spirit. So that is what he says, not only our own body, asangraha paraihi means others' body also is developed. So that gives rise to some kind of vairagya or detachment. So Swamiji says, now explaining this sutra, when there is real purification of the body, external and internal, there arises a sort of neglect of the body, and the idea of keeping it nice vanishes. A face, Swamiji says, which others call most beautiful, will appear to the yogi as mere animal if there is no spirituality or intelligence behind it. Swamiji once jokingly said, some woman asked him in the West, how do you react when you see a beautiful face? Then Swamiji says, the figure, the person who is in front of me, there is no spirituality, the most beautiful face appears like a toad, like an ugly toad. So this is what the yogis really feel. If there is no spiritual intelligence, there's no spirituality behind it, and the spirit does not shine through it, what the world calls a beautiful face will appear like a mere animal. So this thirst after body is the greatest bane of life. according to Swamiji. So the first sign of the establishment of purity, according to him, is that you don't care to think that you are a body. So the moment we think about our body, then keeping it in good order, keeping it beautiful, keeping it healthy, the question arises, and then we are obsessed with that. So purity comes according to this idea, shaucha, or true purity comes when you get rid of the body idea. So I think I have taken enough time, Maharaj. So sattva shuddhi, or that is what is the result of shaucha, and these are the 5 yamas and niyamas. And according to Patanjali, the practice of these yamas and niyamas will prepare a firm ground or a firm foundation for the other angas, other limbs of yoga, which are far more difficult, the pratyahara, then the dharana and dhyana. These, we are unable to do that. We are unable to meditate. We are unable to concentrate because of these gross things are pulling us. So there should be a basic amount of purity or sattva shuddhi, which is the goal of yama and niyama, as it is evident from the sutra number 41. So we will not discuss that. It's a very long sutra. The 5 karmendriyas and gyanendriyas become shuddha. Satisfaction of the mind comes. And finally, once one attains sattva shuddhi, and then one becomes fit for the practice of yoga. That is what these yama and niyamas do. So once again, I thank RKM, very especially Swami Atma Priyananji Maharaj, for giving me this opportunity to share a few thoughts. And the International Day of Yoga is fast approaching. There are so many wonderful programs I just happened to see. And I convey my heartiest thanks and congratulations to Revered Maharaj for conducting this event. And we hope very soon, now that the COVID is over, the COVID restrictions are over, we'll be seeing Swami Atma Priyananji once again here in the UK. We will invite you as and when things become completely normal. So thank you once again. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. We're extremely thankful to Swami Sarvasthananda ji for a simple, wonderful exposition of the Yama and Niyama in the Ashtanga Yoga, because these things are less discussed than meditation and various changes which take place in meditation and so on. So why he very, very beautifully said, why we are not able to meditate or concentrate is because we don't take care of the basics, as we normally say. And when Abdul Salam, the famous Nobel laureate, went to his native place when he came to India, he located the primary school mathematics teacher who taught him mathematics in school and went and touched his feet. Sir, it is because of you I could get the Nobel Prize. Because the basics are the most vital. So we build the building upon very shaky foundation. As Jesus Christ said, build your building on the sand, which is shaky. And then the winds came and the gales blew, and great was its fall. And another wise person built his building house upon a rock. And the winds blew and the gales came, and it could not be shaken because it was built on a rock. So the Yama Niyama, the rock, the bedrock, on which the entire foundation, the edifice of yoga is built. Thank you, Swami Sarvasthananda ji, for being straight, simple, direct, basic also Swami Vivekananda's interpretation, and fully focused to the topic. and finishing in record time. Thank you so much.